So, in terms of getting feedback, growing up in elementary and high school in particular, I don't really remember getting much feedback unless I went up to the teacher myself at the time and asked for it, really. I was more so just given a grade and that was it, or a percentage. If I was given feedback throughout elementary school and high school, it was just really broad. It was kind of just do better, good job, more effort, things of that nature. It wasn't like a very detailed description of where in my assignment or whatever I was doing that I did well, or where in my assignment could I improve upon. It was more so just very broad terms in terms of like what I did good on my assignment or what I did bad on my assignment or what I did good on my tests, things of that nature. So it was never anything very, very well detailed, I would say, throughout my experience growing up. So then when I think for me, what wasn't effective in terms of feedback was just, as I mentioned before, the classic broad responses. What worked best for me though was in-person feedback, or just very in-depth feedback, pinpointing like where I went wrong and what I can do better. Same for if I was doing something good, right? Like generally for me, what would work with feedback is like literally seeing my assignment and the teacher pinpointing in my assignment, okay, this is where you could do better. This is where you did great on your assignment, rather than just me seeing a percentage or grade of what I did. Because even if I got a 90 on my assignment, like why did I get a 90? Or why did I get a 90 on my test? Or why did I get a 40? Right? So that's for me, what worked best for me was like thoroughly explaining, okay, you did great, but this is why you did great. Or you did bad, but this is why you did bad. This is how you can get better. So for me, just that open line of communication between student and teacher was most effective for me in terms of feedback. Has this assignment changed my perspective on assessment? I would say definitely, and definitely throughout my experience at the U of R, I've learned so much. Like when I was in high school, in elementary school, for the most part, like I think the reason why I didn't get much feedback was just kind of the era and generation I was a part of. I think now going forward, I definitely can see like us as teachers and teachers teaching teachers that like the value on assessment is very key for students and learners development in whatever age. Like it could be university, high school, or elementary school, right? So I think nowadays there's more of a push for getting feedback, doing more formative assessment based stuff. Whereas when I went to school, it was more so just doing summative assessment, like tests, 1 minute quizzes, things of that nature. Whereas now we're trying to encourage learners to deepen their understanding on topics rather than just memorizing things and studying for tests at the end of each unit. So that's the big thing now that's changed, and which has opened my eyes in terms of giving more feedback and just how that can improve our students at the time. Just from them reading, okay, I did this great, but I can improve on this next time, right? So I think for me, it's definitely opened my eyes in the aspect of how valuable good feedback can be for learners. So for me now, in saying that, I would approach assessment with a very opened mind, not a closed mind perspective, whereas maybe I won't just always have a big test at the end of each unit to test my students' knowledge. Like maybe I can incorporate other things that are more so formative assessment based rather than just always doing the classic summative assessment exam type thing. Because I realize now, and the evidence shows, that those aren't necessarily the best ways for kids, adults, to learn things and get a deep grasp on different topics and such. So that's the biggest thing that's changed with me in terms of assessment, is I'm going to be very open-minded and very like 50-50 on summative and formative assessment, with having a nice mix of both in my room. I think that's probably the best way I could go about it as a teacher. So I think the biggest thing for me that I learned through learning about summative assessment in my group is how much anxiety summative assessments give to learners and our students, and how much that affects their overall performance and overall knowledge throughout each course they go through. Like, I didn't realize the effects of how many people just don't pursue school or drop out of school just because they can't do tests, they can't do time tests, they can't deal with all that anxiety. So that's the biggest thing I realized through learning about summative assessment, is just how much that affects learners throughout their learning experience. Those tests, those midterms, those finals, all that kind of thing is just how much learning that and growth that potentially takes away from students just because they're so stressed out or just so in detailed in terms of just studying definitions and such that they miss out on the true growth and the true deep understanding of courses, rather than just relaxing, actually reading what's going on and thinking about what's going on, and also discussing what's going on with their peers. Because when you discuss things with your peers, you deepen your knowledge of the topic, whether that's psychology or science or whatever you're doing, rather than just studying, okay, these are the definitions you need on the test, these are the definitions you need on the quiz, make sure you know these, rather than seeing everything from a big picture lens in your course and really getting a grasp of what you should know in your course and what you should know about this, and that's how you can apply this in your real life. So that's what I've kind of learned from my group and my topic, is that how summative assessment almost takes away learning from many students in a sense, because they're just preparing for one thing rather than getting a big picture grasp of the course. So a big thing for me as a teacher and a future educator, as I mentioned in my presentation on summative assessment, is that I really want to try to have a balance, and if I can, I really want to adjust the weight of tests, as in summative tests, and then activities such as formative assessments. I'd like to have a healthy balance to try to promote, okay, we're doing formative assessment, but that still matters in terms of your grade, rather than summative assessment just taking control of pretty much your whole grade, as it is in most courses, right? Because the big thing for me is that kids, adults, students, they get so locked in, okay, where is my grade coming from? How big of a percentage is this assignment going to be in terms of my overall grade to finish the course? So then students undervalue the formative assessment side of things, and they just tone in on summative assessment, like the big exams coming, the big tests is coming, right? So for me, I would love to create a nice healthy balance in my room of, okay, formative assessment matters, you guys. Summative assessment also matters, but don't lose out on potential learning just because, okay, the weight on this formative assessment thing isn't as much as the summative. They're both equally as important to each other, and you can argue one's more important than the other, right? So that's where I want to try to improve that in my classroom. So on the day on my group's presentations, I really homed in on the formative assessment presentation, just because that's the opposite assessment that we were doing, because we were doing summative assessment. So I really homed in that one just to see what kinds of ideas that you could kind of implement as formative assessments in your room. And I just really liked how people mentioned exit tickets, polls, stuff like that, where just different ways to increase learning in students. It doesn't just have to be summative assessment, tests, quiz, presentation, things like that. Where in the formative assessment side of things, there was group discussions, there was all kinds of different ideas that you could implement into your classroom. So that really stood out to me, and just how much formative assessment is almost undervalued. At least in past generations. Now I think it's kind of getting better, where people are understanding like the formative assessment side is probably just as valuable as the summative assessment, if not more valuable, right? So that's the biggest thing that I took away from theirs, is just how much safer students feel to make mistakes and learn in the formative assessment aspect rather than the summative assessment aspects, where students are almost scared to speak their mind or potentially fail. And then in the formative assessment side, students are more so willing to take risks, which is what we want. Like, we want students to try to learn and take risks, right? So that's the biggest thing that stood out to me in terms of on my presentation day. And I just think the biggest takeaway and the biggest thing that I would want to apply to my classroom from more so the formative side is that we as teachers and future educators in this new generation, we have to be learner-centered, in my opinion, just because nowadays kids, students, they want you to relate to them. They want you to show your weaknesses rather than just be like a enforcer in your classroom. Like, they want you to be on their level. They want you to be at their side. They don't want you to be above them anymore or be the higher power in the room. So that's the biggest thing that I took away from the formative assessment side of things, is that it's starting to trend now more towards the learner-centered aspect. Like, what can I do to improve my students' development rather than let my ego get in the way or try to make the classroom like a power dimension between teachers and students. It should just be like a level playing field. So that's the biggest thing that I took away